All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Bradley Peterson. I am with Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, Executive Director. Thank you for joining us for our session preview in terms of our legislative priorities. We try to do this every year. We've got a great program for you this morning. We've got a great lineup of local officials who are going to speak on a couple of topics. We have Mayor Larry Cuffey from Virginia, Ian Rigg, who is the city administrator in Albert Lea, Minnesota, and Rick Schultz, who is the president of the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. And so we've got, I think, a good program here. As we get going, we'll take questions here at the end. You can raise your hand and somebody or Alex in our office will unmute you and recognize you, and then we'll field your question. But getting started here, 2023, the legislature did a lot. We all know that it was, by all measures, a fairly historic session in terms of the volume and velocity of things that the legislature did. And so there was a lot to deal with last year, and cities are still working on implementing and getting their brains around many of those issues. And so as we look to 2024, we're really interested in the legislature focusing on the basics. And so today we're going to talk about passing a bonding bill, which definitely needs to happen, and then also shoring up our fragile EMS system. Those should be at the top of the list in terms of the legislature's to-do list. So those are our top priorities. Obviously, we will continue to work on and watch issues related to local government aid and property taxes, economic development, housing, childcare. All of those things we'll definitely be watching and working on. But bonding bill, EMS, and the state's relationship with its local governments are going to be the things that we focus the most on. And so with that, I would like to turn it over to Mayor Rick Schultz, who is from St. Joe and is this year's president of the CGMC.
Thank you, Bradley. Good morning. I'm Rick Schultz, mayor of St. Joseph and president of the CGMC. Like Bradley said, last year was a busy one at the Capitol and the legislature did a lot. In addition to working on the day-to-day challenges that cities face, we're also trying to get our brains around all the new work that has to be done as a result of the 2023 legislative session. As a mayor of St. Joseph, I see this firsthand every day. This is one of the many reasons we need the legislature to help our city shore up our infrastructure by passing a bonding bill with funding that supports the initiatives and enduring and fundamental need for cities all across Minnesota. EMS delivery is another vital component for cities and their communities. Whether it's a heart attack, a vehicle crash, or other life-threatening situation, people's survival relies heavily on the availability of EMS providers in their area. Unfortunately, the challenges to the sustainability of our EMS services are mounting. This already fragile system is at a breaking point. EMS closures and consolidations have been on the rise throughout the state since 2001, and without state investment, the future will continue to look bleak. These and other critical needs, such as housing, childcare, cannot afford to keep being pushed down the state's to-do list. That is why the most important thing that this legislator can do in the upcoming session is to focus on the basics. Because without the basics, the communities cannot thrive. This means holding back on the passage of new legislation and allowing cities to catch up while investing in things that are essential to the foundation and stability of communities. It is only with diligent, proactive, and bipartisan action that we can ensure these critical needs are met for our families and their communities, which should inarguably be the top priority for lawmakers during this upcoming legislative session. Bradley?
Thank you, Mayor. As you said, there really are a lot of issues that still need to be addressed, the challenges that communities are facing. And one of those things that we think the legislature really needs to focus in on this year is the passage of a bonding bill. Now, last year, obviously, the legislature passed a historic capital investment package that invested historic amounts of money in things like water and wastewater infrastructure. Nonetheless, those needs continue to persist. A recent report that came out of the MPCA on the needs around these saw that there was, a pretty significant increase in the need for funds for things such as mitigation of pollutants. In fact, the need there increased by about 77%. The legislature also needs to pass a bonding bill because the delay in 2022. Not passing a bonding bill in 2022 pushed off a number of projects. Meanwhile, the list of projects that need funding and are ready to go continues to grow. So if the legislature does not pass a bonding bill, there will be a lot of cities who are ready to go, who have projects that will go unfunded. And so to talk about the perspective locally in Albert Lea, I'm going to turn it over to Ian Rigg, who's the city administrator there, to talk about his city's issues.
Thank you, Bradley. And thank you all for attending and giving me a chance to speak on this issue. We're a community of a little over 18,000, but we service over 20,000 people with our wastewater treatment plant. The facility has been aging. We have been anticipating the end of its useful life. We had been putting money aside, continually raising rates. However, a few years back, when we had probably nearly 10 million saved up for what we thought was going to be a $30 million rehab of the entire facility to bring it back to another 40-year life cycle, we were told that we needed to significantly remove phosphorus because of the conditions in the river. Now, our requirement would only make a small dent in it, but we still want to do our part, be good stewards of the environment, have clean water for the community and the communities downstream from us. But that cost took it from 30 million to 60 million. At which point then we started to ask for assistance. And then what became 60 million was 70 million. And what is now 70 million is now 80 million, even after we have received a small amount of money and moved forward with at least one critical piece of the infrastructure that was failing. And so we had to move on and do a $6 million improvement on our grit building while still leaving another $80 million left. So this problem isn't going away. Delays are not going to make it go away. The prices are going to continue to skyrocket. And speaking of skyrocketing prices, if we do not receive the assistance, our rates will have to go up significantly. They'll go up 3 times. They will far exceed the clean water affordability rates, which are put in place for a reason. And all of this is more reason why we need a bonding bill, why we need to make sure we improve PSIG and WIF funding in the state, because these projects have gotten more expensive. The requirements have gotten more stringent. And clean water is very important to Minnesotans and to our community. And I know we all want to do our part, but there are certain limitations, especially in the rural parts of the state. We are hopeful the legislature will pass a bonding bill with the significant funding needed for water and wastewater infrastructure grants and loans to help offset these costs for the communities and for our community and across the state. So with that, Bradley, thank you, and turn it back over to you.
All right. Thanks, Ian. And so, to address these issues like the ones in Albert Lea and other communities, CGMC is going to be asking for $299 million in the bonding bill for water and wastewater programs through the Public Facilities Authority. It's a big number, but it's a big need. And, just one plant in Albert Lea with a price tag of $80 million, there are numerous communities who are facing similar issues. The other item that we're highlighting from a policy perspective this session is emergency medical services. Now, this is something that is new for CGMC. This is not an issue that we have dealt with in the past, but over the last 2 years, our communities have been literally ringing alarm bells about the fragility of the system. Reimbursements from Medicare and Medicaid and private insurance are simply not keeping up with the services provided. The fee-for-service model is, frankly, in many of our communities, not sustainable. And so we've been traveling around the state, talking to communities across the state about their issues, their concerns, and they are many. funding, the reimbursement piece obviously is one, workforce is another. And then, there probably are going to need to be some reforms in terms of service delivery and how service districts are oriented and that kind of thing. But we've come across the conviction that for 2024, the best thing that the legislature can do is to inject $120 million of emergency funding into the system for the primary service area license holders, those who are licensed to operate and run the ambulance systems across the state, to keep them going, to prop them up, to make sure that they're there for the next year, so that we can continue to have deeper conversations about the systematic issues at the legislature and in other areas. And so to talk about the local perspective, I'm going to turn it over to Mayor Larry Cuffey in Virginia. So Mayor Cuffey, it's all yours. And you'll want to unmute yourself there.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, you're good. Go ahead.
Apologize. Technical difficulties here on the northern part of the state of Minnesota. So thank you, Bradley. And thank you for having me here today. And I'm here to answer any questions you might have. Like many other communities in the state of Minnesota, particularly in the rural environment, our community is experiencing many challenges to deliver emergency services in Virginia and beyond. The city of Virginia, we are an ALS service, an advanced life support service that runs 6 ambulance rigs consisting of 38 full-time fire EMS employees, which includes dual role paramedics and firefighters, single role paramedics, and emergency medical technicians that can provide BLS basic life services. The coverage for our area service provider, 640 square miles, encompassing many of the other communities in Northeast Minnesota, operating our own budget. Our budget for ambulance service in the city of Virginia to run this system is $3.8 million, and that comes from our budget. In 2023, we conducted 2,664 emergency services runs. This does not include transfers. This does not include intercepts, with 1,253 total transfers as well. Our Medicare runs in 2023 totaled 1,667 of these runs. These are gross charges adding up to a cost of about $3.7 million, of which we've only recovered through Medicare reimbursement, $1,003,000. That's it. So our annual losses over the last 7 years for our ambulance provider, what we charge, we run as a deficit of, on average for the last 7 years, $500,000 a year, sometimes more. And we anticipate this will likely be in 2023 as well. Sadly, EMS is not considered an essential service in the state of Minnesota. So many of the mechanisms provided by the state to support essential services are not available to our EMS systems. So the citizens of Virginia are bearing the cost of the entire coverage. No other community contributes to the ALS service that is provided. Now, there is legislation in the state of Minnesota that gives the authority for us to levy a tax to these communities that we provide. However, it's tax without representation, and we need support from the local communities through some kind of a resolution in order to allow us to do that. We've been unsuccessful over the past decade and beyond to be able to accomplish that goal and objective. So we're bearing the cost of the entire service area. We need a new sustainable source of revenue to help alleviate the costs and the burden on the Virginia taxpayers and other communities suffering in the same circumstances. There are other communities, whether they're BLS or they're volunteer or they're paid on call, they're in the same boat we are. They're running as a deficit. They need the help as well. And the $120 million that the Greater Coalition, Greater Minnesota Cities, and all of us are asking for is just an emergency Band-Aid to help us get through a year. This is not sustainable for us, for the city of Virginia, for the next 3 years. So we need some help. We have committed And our committee has committed to building a new public safety building. Our fire EMS services, it works on a building that was built in 1895. So we have a new facility being built. So we're committed to providing that service, and we're willing to bear the burden, the costs associated with the ambulance service that we provide in the city of Virginia. But it's the outside area, the service area, that we need some help in recovering some of our revenue. And all we're trying to do is break even. And I'm sure that's what some of these other communities are trying to do as well. So that's an issue. So I'd like to allude to this study here. It's the Minnesota Department of Health. A quiet crisis, Minnesota's rural ambulance service at risk. This was a study that was commissioned by the Minnesota Department of Health in 2002. And it shows the crisis that ambulance services are in. We're a critical mass right now. We need some help from the legislature. That's why this is such an important issue for all of us, not only in Northeast Minnesota, but throughout the areas that provide services to save someone's life. So it is imperative that the state acts now, because if this is a crisis, we'll have life-threatening, long-term consequences for our children, for our families, and for our communities at large. So I'm hoping that the legislature would take this under advisement, provide that emergency funding in the first year. This is a short-term patch. We need a midterm solution and a long-term solution to be able to provide this ABALS service. And one last point is that our ambulance one run might be 70, 80 miles. And then the transfer has to go to another hospital elsewhere. In some of the metropolitan areas, with all due respect, maybe their ambulance run is only 2, 3, 4, 5 miles. We only have one duty station. We don't have them all over the place. And so this is a very difficult service to provide. And that's why it's important for rural ambulance service as well, volunteers and PID on call, to have that opportunity to rely upon us during intercepts to help save somebody's life. So they need help as well. So thank you for listening, and we hope that we'll be able to move something forward in this legislative session. Thank you very much. Bradley, turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, and the mayor, highlights, some issues that we found are pretty common across the state. He mentioned that the city of Virginia is servicing a territory of over 600 square miles with 6 ambulance rigs. Just yesterday, I was in the city of Cokato. They have a service territory of 90 square miles with 1 rig. And so all of these systems, especially those that are municipally run, which is over half of the ambulance license holders in the state, are at a critical point and do need an injection of money this year from the legislature, so that can be a bridge so that we can have these longer term conversations about sustainable funding and service delivery models going forward. But we need to make sure that none of these entities close here in the next year, and that folks can get stabilized so that we can have those longer term conversations. That's going to be, I think, one of our highest priorities this session. And so rounding into our third and sort of last thing that we wanted to touch on, and then we'll take some questions, is, as we said at the opening, and as Mayor Schultz said, we strongly believe that the legislature this year, 2024, in this short session, non-budget year, needs to be focused on the basics, focused on passing a bonding bill, focused on core infrastructure, focused on shoring up our EMS system. Last year, the legislature, as we mentioned, did a lot. And a lot of those things went on the plates of city officials like the ones on this call. And so city officials have been working diligently over the last year to understand, digest, implement new mandates, new requirements, new laws from the legislature. And I think it's important this year, as the legislature is planning out their work, to understand that. I think that we are going to be seeing a number of proposals come forward related to development, zoning, housing, land use type of issues. We think those conversations can wait until 2025. One of the challenges that I think our officials definitely have is, as they look at the solutions that are being proffered by policymakers in St. Paul, they don't necessarily feel like they relate to the problems as our city leaders understand them on the ground. As we've said before, Minnesota is a big and diverse state, and one size fits all solutions don't necessarily work. What might work in one community and make absolute sense there may not in another. And we definitely feel that local leaders should be the ones who are making those determinations. I think if the legislature persists along the path that they've started, they are going to find that they are both alienating and frustrating their partners in local government. And so from our perspective, for 2024, what the legislature needs to do is pump the brakes on significant new policy and focus on the basics, pass a bonding bill that invests in core infrastructure around the state, shore up our EMS system, and do very little else that's going to impact cities or city operations. Since, as I said, local officials, local staff are still doing a lot to digest what the legislature did last year. And so with that, I will open it up for any questions that there might be.
All right, go ahead, Ellie. Ellie Roth, you're allowed to speak now. Well, it seems like we might be having some technical difficulties with their mic, but Ellie Roth, you are unmuted, so feel free to ask your question at any time.
Or is there perhaps we could take it via chat? Is that an option, Alex?
Yes, absolutely. You can put it in the chat if you're having any difficulties. And if you're still unable to, everyone in attendance is allowed to send questions after the fact, and we will be sure to get back to you with any lingering questions. But I'm not seeing anything.
So it looks like Ellie's question from NPR News is, how optimistic are you in ensuring these requests will pass? I can certainly start from my perspective, and our guests can weigh in as well. Certainly, I think on the bonding bill front, the committees have been touring the state from both the House and the Senate. The governor has put forward his package. So there is, I think, a lot of discussion, a lot of interest, a lot of work being done on a bipartisan basis to get a bonding bill passed that hopefully invests in some of these priorities. Obviously, the bonding bill process is pretty touch and go, and it goes right up to the end of session. But I think that they can do it. I think that there's no reason that they cannot. And that's where I would start is, I don't see any reason why they could not or should not pass a bonding bill that invests in these core priorities. And so I'm relatively optimistic that they can get there this session. I don't know on that score if any of our folks have anything to add, but I would certainly pause here and take that, and then I'll answer the EMS question or the possibility on EMS. Yeah, Mayor Cuffey.
Yes, thank you. Just a quick note. The city of Virginia is unique in many other cities in the state of Minnesota. We provide steam as a source of heat to our customers. Now, we've had a mandated program to convert from steam to natural gas over the course of the last 5 years. And there's one small core district downtown that needs to be done. And that's going to put a significant burden on our businesses from a cost anywhere from $80,000 to up to $3, maybe even more $1 million in order to convert from steam to natural gas. In the bonding bill, the city has $1.7 million requests. And so in answer to the reporter's question, I hope that they do pass a bonding bill because it's such an imperative piece, not only for me in our city of Virginia, but I'm sure for all the other cities that are looking for the infrastructure, particularly Ian, who's got that water infrastructure that he's moving forward. So we hope that will be the case. So thank you.
Yeah, and on the EMS question, I actually am fairly optimistic on it. There is, I think, a lot of renewed energy around this discussion. Not only I think our local government's getting more involved in this, which I think is changing the dynamic somewhat. But there's, as a result of the Office of Legislative Auditor report a couple of years ago on the EMS system and the EMSRB, there's much more legislative attention on these issues. The legislature has its own joint task force, which has been touring around the state, hearing from local communities. And, we've been tracking those, and, what local people are telling that panel of legislators aligns with what we're saying here, that we need solutions to the funding challenges, that is the most critical point. Folks are talking about the need for dollars into the system. And so we're getting, I think, a lot of traction and a lot of interest, again, on a bipartisan basis on this issue. And so I'm very, very hopeful in that regard. Ellie's got another question on cannabis. Howard,
Bradley,
yeah, please.
if I could, I would like to just answer actually both questions that have come up. One was about the optimism, the other one's about the cannabis.
Mhm.
That's all right.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I think that we have to come into this with a sense of optimism anyway, because if we don't, then it's just going to impact our work and our efforts in a negative way. But I do feel that everyone does understand the problem. I think a lot of people agree on the solutions. I think it's just the one thing that I'm optimistic and hopeful for is that we can take this, at least when it comes to bonding and some of these other things, and not make it very partisan or part of the partisan attacks or debates and coming up into election. I think a lot can get done. Those that don't have a partisan flavor. And so I think if we do stick to the basics as what we were talking about now, a lot of positive things can be done. And as for the question on the rollout of cannabis, I was asked how are communities preparing for cannabis dispensary rollout? Are any looking at municipal dispensaries? City of Albert Lee is not looking at municipal because we have few businesses that focus right now on low potency products, as well as CDBs and other related hemp products. So we do not feel that doing that would be a wise step for some of our local businesses. And as for prepping, I think our biggest focus has been on zoning, looking at appearances zoning, what is the right place for it. I think when it comes to the number that are allowed, we are discussing those things as well. But it has been a bit, we feel that we've had to kind of venture out to the dark a little bit because we have just not seen enough rolling out from the Office of Cannabis Management, providing us the guidance that we need in any kind of model ordinances. So we're just trying to rely on existing ordinances and looking at it as similar to things like tobacco, alcohol, those kind of businesses and how those should be appropriately placed within the community.
Thanks, Ian. Mayor Schultz, do you want to talk about cannabis a little bit?
Yeah, I do. I was going to mention that St. Joe sits in close proximity with 5 other cities: Sartell, St. Cloud, Wade Park, Sauk Rapids, St. Augustus. So collectively, we're looking at how number one, we are looking at doing a municipal dispensary, but we're also looking at how we're going to police, waiting for rules for all 6 cities to do the same thing, that ordinances and enforcement and how they're placed based on what the cannabis office says works for all 6 of us. So you go into Sartell and then 2 miles away, it's a different set of rules that you follow for cannabis. So we're working collectively together as 6 cities with the county to make sure we're all doing it kind of the same way, following the same rules. We're still waiting for some infrastructure, some basic rules of the road from the office once it gets created and publishes its documents.
All right. Mayor Cuffey, anything you want to add from the Virginia perspective on cannabis?
Well, we're acutely aware of the state law with respect to this. We're not going to roll out any program whatsoever. We have some discussions over the course of the last couple of months after the law was passed. But we're going to wait for the Office of Cannabis to open to give us some guidelines as to what they're going to require. All the infrastructure and all the discussion we have may be moot until we find out what that office is going to provide. And as the other speakers have said, that we want to ensure that if we do this, we're going to do it on the same rules of any other community. With a city a size of 8,432 people, we're allowed to have one, and I don't think we're looking at a municipal one at this time. But from my perspective and my former line of work, it's a double-edged sword as far as legalizing the cannabis, but we have to follow the law, and we'll do what we can in order to accomplish that. We're going to wait for the Office of Cannabis to give us some additional guidelines with respect to this, but it's on our radar. We're prepared to move forward if necessary, and when it becomes available for additional information. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Mayor Cuffey. So the next question that we've got is from MinPost, asking about staffing levels and staffing EMS and what kind of issues cities have been experiencing. So I'll take a sort of very broad statewide look at it, and then Mayor Cuffey, maybe I'll turn it over to you to talk about your experience in Virginia in terms of workforce and staffing. So one of the key things that we hear, or one of the concerns that we hear quite a bit about as we travel around, is the workforce issue, is the fact that as the new director of the Emergency Medical Services Regulatory Board has noted that there are more people leaving and letting their licenses lapse in terms of EMS providers than there are coming into the industry. There are fewer people who are going through the training. Part of the challenge is that, in many parts of the state, this is it's a volunteer model or a paid on-call model. And so it's a situation where, likewise, with many fire departments, you might be working your job, and then you get a call that there's an EMS issue. You leave your job, you go down to the station, you change into your uniform, you hop in the rig, and you're out to the field. And there are fewer and fewer folks who are able to do that. Obviously, workforce challenges across the state in any number of areas are very challenging. And so it is a huge problem that cities are facing. Mayor Cuffey, up in Virginia, how are you guys doing in terms of recruiting and keeping a workforce, especially when it comes to EMS?
Well, St. Louis County being the largest county in the state of Minnesota, we're in the northeast portion of St. Louis County. So we have a unique model. We prepared, I think, in the past to try to ensure that we have a workforce that's going to provide, run the 6 ambulance service and provide the service that we need in Virginia and beyond. So if you just focus on the EMS aspect of it, historically, we required our firefighters to also be paramedics. We've changed that model. So now we have paramedics, paramedics, and ALS and EMS personnel. So what we do is that we hire and we recruit paramedics, the ALS service. We train them internally because we have that ability to do so, to train them to be a firefighter 1 and a firefighter 2. So they have the option of being both. So that helps because you have firefighters that want to become a firefighter. They're also a paramedic. And so those who do not want to be a firefighter can be a single role paramedic. And so we leave our firefighter paramedic rig here and then move on. So we have our internal recruitment program. We start from the bottom. Say we hire somebody part-time as EMS. They move into a full-time position. The basic life support. So our EMTs. And so when they can move into full-time EMT, they can move and with training and some assistance from us into a single role paramedic position. And we train to be a firefighter. So they provide that role. So we have a feeder system that we use. It has been working significantly well for us over the course of the last 5 to 7 years. And that's why we're able to maintain the full staffing levels, providing full-time fire and ALS service to our communities.
Okay, very good. Well, thanks. I appreciate that local perspective. Like I said, after the reimbursement rates, workforce is the thing that we hear most about. And to answer the other part of the question is, the $120 million that we are contemplating would go for whatever the license holder thinks they need in terms of filling a gap, whether it is training, workforce, capital, just covering their operations otherwise. We intend the money to be very, very flexible in terms of its use. Another question related to here, folks keep hearing about the need for EMS delivery reform. A lot of folks think that there are some reforms that are necessary. Kind of what is the prospect on that? So, there are a number of stakeholders who feel very strongly that how the service areas are allocated and structured needs to be looked at. That is a conversation that CGMC is absolutely willing and interested in having next year. This year, our focus is on the emergency Band-Aid funding so that we can get to next year and have discussions about what should service delivery look like, how should these service areas be organized, and what kind of long-term dedicated funding can be created to keep these systems as stable as possible. And the question goes on to mention the issue of a taxing district. As Mayor Cuffey noted, you still need buy-in from the other communities. In some places that happens. In some places it doesn't necessarily happen as easily. It's very community by community specific in terms of how those conversations go. I know that there are a couple of taxing districts that do exist. And even with that, and even with the contributions of surrounding communities, they're often still not able to break even, and they are still running a deficit. And so our look at the issue is, we think there needs to be a statewide solution to these things. Other questions?
I
Wanna make
believe
sure-
there's another question in the Q&A from Ellie Roth about the potential St. Joseph Municipal Dispensary.
Okay.
Yeah, I saw that. So let me just go a little further. At our last work session, the city council and staff talked about what would a municipal dispensary look like in St. Joe. And so we left it on the table as, yes, we could consider that. We wouldn't restrict other cities if they didn't want to have a municipal dispensary, but we're having that discussion with them. Right now, most of the talk is on enforcement ordinances, so that the look and feel of what you do in one city is similar across the other 6 cities so closely located. The dispensary discussion will continue, but we wouldn't demand or restrict other municipalities from not having it, and they wouldn't restrict us from having our own. So it's part of the longer term discussion of how do we put our arms around cannabis? What does it really mean for our 6 cities, and who are the dispensaries going to be and where they're going to be? And it's just really early discussions at this point.
All right. Yeah, very early days in those discussions for sure. And I think it's interesting. I mean, I think here you've seen heard from the 3 different folks that we have on differing approaches from different communities, trying to figure out for themselves what might work the best. And I think that's a good model to operate off of. Any other questions? Otherwise, we can bring it to a close. We got something here. Let me read this. So just this seems to be more of a comment about the potential of the talking about these struggles actually being a disincentive to recruiting young people. I think, I'll talk a little bit about the meeting that we had in Cokato last night. It was very interesting. And Cokato actually is a community that is fully staffed. And in fact, they have a waiting list. So they're rare in that regard. And what they talked about was that for the people who do this work, it is a call to service. It is something that they feel deeply committed to in terms of serving their community. That they want to be out there, they want to be doing it. And I think we're convinced that, there are probably lots of people in our communities who feel similarly. But I think the main issue is that we need to find ways to support them in doing that, and making sure that they've got the tools, the resources, and some level of compensation to be able to do this. On the volunteer staffing model right now, if you average out somebody's wages, they might be doing it for $2 to $3 an hour. Nobody's doing this to get rich. They're doing it because they take pride in their community, they love their communities, and they feel that call to service. And so I think hopefully that's something that we can continue to tap into here as we go forward. With that, I think we can probably bring this to a wrap. But what I will say to our friends in the media, we really appreciate your taking the time to participate in this, to ask questions, to listen to the discussion. Please think of both the staff here at the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities and our city members as resources on questions. If you have questions, want to know more about an issue, certainly you can connect with us, and we'll try to connect you with local folks who have a good understanding of what's going on and can give insight into the issue. I want to thank Mayor Schultz, Mayor Cuffey, and Ian for joining us as well. Your insights obviously are what drive all of this and make our work possible. And so with that, really want to thank everybody for participating, and we can bring this to a close. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you, Bradley. Ian, Rick, appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.